evening, Honorable Justice Dr. Anitha Sumanth, in the year 2016, was appointed as permanent judge of High Court of Madras. With the almost dedicated and flawlessness, prestigiously, Madam is adoring the same till date. I deem it to be my privilege and honor to invite our chief guest, Your Ladyship, Honorable Justice Dr. Anitha Sumanth, to deliver the special address.
Thank you very much for a very, very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Am I audible enough?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you for a double introduction at your end. One from your registrar and one from the charming Dr. Uma Maheshwari. So thank you very much for that. Good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure being here with you. It's my privilege to have been invited to participate in this valedictory function. As I logged in, I just realized that I was interrupting a Q&A session that was perhaps spilling over from the last session of the seminar. And I regret very much having done that, because my intention was not to interrupt it. And I wish that it had gone to its logical conclusion and finished, because I'm sure that a question answer session or any academic or intellectual exercise would have been far more instructive and interesting to the participants than an official function of this nature. But be that as it may, here we are. Thank you very much. The topic for this conference intrigued me. When Dr. Sarvani invited me, I was given to understand that it was a program on sustainable coastal community-based disaster risk reduction. And it intrigued me for this reason. Today, when we speak of disaster, there is only one thing in our minds. I wouldn't say one thing uppermost in our minds. There is only one thing in our minds, and that's the ongoing pandemic. So I was only wondering why the conference was restricted to the disaster management measures to be taken by coastal community. Of course, a very, very vital necessity, no doubt, but why a 3-day program would be dedicated only for that? But it was only when I heard your rapporteur, Dr. Haritha Devi, that I understood that your conference had encompassed a whole lot of other perspectives and viewpoints as well. This is very, very heartening. And some of the points that she put forth, some of the points and perspectives that she mentioned had been covered. I think we simply cannot underestimate the impact that the pandemic has had on each one of us. It would be right to say that not one of us is untouched by what has happened, by what is happening. And I I extend my congratulations to the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai, as well as the National Institute of Disaster Management, particularly Dr. Sarvani and a very, very committed and dedicated team for this laudable effort. It appears that several suggestions have been made in the course of this 3-day conference, and I would urge you very seriously to compile the suggestions that have emanated from the various experts. Of course, compiling the presentations themselves would be of great intellectual interest to, I'm sure, many, many of us. But if the suggestions could be specifically identified and circulated to the powers that be, whoever can act on them, I'm sure that many of the grievances will at least they will be aware of such grievances and something might come out of it. So that is one suggestion that I wanted to make. Now, I'm going to keep this very brief because you had a 3-day program and I'm sure you're ready to wind it up and call it a day. A lot of food for thought, I'm sure. So I'm not going to elaborate on the international as well as domestic covenants that are available for management of disasters, because I noticed that at the time of the introductory remarks, the director had given a very exhaustive list of the covenants that were at play. So I'm not going to touch on that aspect. theoretically, it would appear that we have our act in place, that we are ready to address a disaster, theoretically, on paper. Practically, are we? I think the events that have unfolded, the viewpoints presented by the speakers over the last 3 days would show that we are still grappling in many areas. No doubt, people all over, including the official missionary, as well as the Institute of Disaster Management, various agencies, various non-governmental agencies, various pockets of people all over the world have been doing what they can to deal with the disaster, but a lot remains to be done as yet. We have been armed with the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 and the National Disaster Management Act, which is a more recent enactment of the year 2005. Now, the first is a legislation that is a century and a quarter old. And this was enacted to address the attack of bubonic plague in Bombay. Under the second, a National Disaster Management Authority has been set up to spearhead efforts to contain the pandemic. They have been issuing guidelines to the state and union territories to apply in their respective regions. Many questions have been cropping up as to what is being done, what needs to be done, and I don't propose to go into all that now, to such detail now, because you have been going through it the last 3 days. Now, one of the questions that has arisen is whether the provisions of these enactments are adequate to address the issues that confront us, or whether they are being deployed adequately enough to address these issues, whether at all they were intended to address a pandemic or a disaster which is a countrywide affair, rather than those that are perhaps region specific. All these are things that are being debated in the appropriate circles. One of the suggestions made is to the effect that we as a country should enact as legislation specific to COVID-19, as has Singapore and the United Kingdom. So I'm sure many of these things will get ironed over in the days and weeks to come. Now, the message that I wanted to leave with you is that you had a 3-day conference outlining the impact of the disaster on various sections of society, and no doubt it must have been a numbing experience to know how the pandemic has affected each one of us in so many different ways, many ways in which we may not have envisaged at all, seeing as many of us are cocooned in our own little islands of existence. Therefore, it has been surely an exercise of awakening for many of us. So I wanted to end this conference on a note of hope. The overriding sense when we sit as a judge, when I sit every morning, we find hope every minute of every day simply in the effort that is being made by so many persons around us in spite of the detrimental effects of the pandemic. We see people around us in the registry. We see people around us in the courts. We see litigants. We see lawyers. So many who have beaten what is happening and who are still trying to make the most of what we have in the day before us. And that, I think, is a ray of hope that is very, very heartening. The attempt to cope is what I want to point out. That attempt to cope is a ray that we should all inculcate, and we should do what we can to ensure that that attempt to cope is available to those around us. I had recently occasion to be part of an interview panel where we recruited youngsters for part of a research assignment. And I tell you, that was such a positive experience. We conducted it, first of all, on a virtual platform. Being able to connect 50 people, 100 people, 200 people on a virtual platform is itself a great thing, because this is something that we have developed. the ability to connect in spite of being unable to physically see and touch somebody. That's a great thing that we have developed, and that only shows us that we are able to bring technology to our assistance. I do hope that we hold on to that and we find ways of enabling technology to take forward this exercise. So I was telling you about the interview. We found that students or young professionals were connecting from all over the state. And while the effort of that virtual interview itself was firstly a great success for that particular institution, the Judicial Academy, the effort that each of those young professionals took, they were all sitting in various parts of the district, sometimes in rural areas, with challenges in connectivity. And it was fabulous. It was simply fabulous to see the effort. We interviewed about 30 to 35 people, and some of the youngsters, we said, your connectivity in this place is not very good. They said, give us a moment. They went to different parts of their house. They went to the garden. They went to the backyard. And they made sure that they were able to have their voices heard. That's the important thing. At the end of it, the takeaway was that the use of technology, the platform to connect, and the determination of the people who were wishing to participate in that endeavor, it made it a out and out success. And that, I think, is something which was a great lesson. Educators, educational institutions should ensure that the technology is made available to students and to faculties. Judicial institutions must do what they can to extend it to all the stakeholders as far as possible. Parents should make it available to their children, corporates to employees, wherever possible. Technology is the need of the hour, and we should ensure that we make it available to make sure the channels of communication are kept open. This was the positive note that I wanted to leave in all of you before you called it a day, wound up, and went back to other things. In conclusion, I will quote from Socrates. He said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." He said this in the 5th century BCE, and it is as relevant today as it was then. This only means that change is inevitable. Sometimes the change may be small, sometimes the change may be life-altering, it may be large, but change happens every second of every minute of every day. And if we look ahead with hope and energy, we are bound to triumph in our endeavors. Great topics that have been selected, a great effort that has been put together. My congratulations to all of you and best wishes to many, many more such endeavors. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Your Ladyship. Sorry for repeating the profile again, but that was really magnetic and mesmerizing one. I should admit, I had once had the opportunity, probably twice had the opportunity to meet you in person when I was faculty coordinator for Moot Court Association. I had come there along with my colleague, Dr. Rajalakshmi ma'am, and we met you. And from that day, and the day when I was given this opportunity to moderate this event, the name I saw, I had just grabbed this opportunity to meet you again. But yes, virtually, we missed that. And I still remember it was just like my viva when I met you. I had to brief you upon the moot court problem and other things. And from that day onwards, I really feel that the words that we have used to introduce you was not wrong. Thank
You're
you.
very, very kind. Thank you very much. And one thing that I forgot to mention, and perhaps I will take the opportunity to say now, is my connection with your institution that was mentioned by both of you in your introductions goes